Welcome back. It's 7:15. The Democratic Alliance's Federal Congress has picked John Steenhuisen to lead the party once again. Helen Zille is the Federal Council Chairperson still. She was unopposed after her only challenger left the race for the position. So what exactly do the results for the Blue Party mean ahead of the 2024 national elections? What about Steenhuisen's comments about their openness to coalitions next year, rather their non-willingness to be that open with certain political parties? Well, let's get the thoughts of political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze joining us this morning. Morning to you, Prof. Always appreciate the time. Let's start there if we can. It wasn't just an important election for the delegates out at Gallagher Estate to choose a new leader. This is who is going to go up against the president of the ANC in next year's election. So there was a lot riding on this. Can the DA get it right next year?
Well, they've announced many plans. They've set out, for example, an idea about how to bring the different opposition parties together, how to form a type of a coalition before the election already. It's clear that the DA obviously realizes they can't do it on their own yet. They simply don't have the public support for that, or that level of support for it. So they are now talking seriously about coalitions, as you've indicated. But they've also drawn a line under one of the parties, and that's the EFF. They've actually declared the EFF their main opponent in this election. At the same time, as you say, they have now put together their team of the party, which to a large extent is a form of continuity. It's not so much of a new group. The differences are mainly mainly at the level of the deputy chairpersons, but not in terms of the top four. And that is himself, Helen Zille, Ivan Meyer as the chairperson, and then the leadership who deals with their finance also. So I think it's therefore a bit of continuity, a lot of continuity, a bit of changes. But what is very important, I would say, is the fact that Mpho Palazzi was not at all really in the running. that she clearly didn't have substantial support there. So it was to a large extent a consolidation of the DA's position.
I want to ask about that as well. There was a lot of talk around not having a deputy federal leader of the DA as well. Have they missed a trick here by not having, and this has been a talking point with the DA for a long time, Prof, tell me if you agree, that there isn't a black female leadership position within the DA, and there was the possibility by having a deputy. It was voted against at Congress. Yes, the party can obviously vote for itself and how it wants to function, but should they have had a deputy with possibly Mpho Palazzi there, or could that have created two centers of power?
Well, the notion of a deputy leader already emerged with at the previous conference with Mbali Tuli, and she suggested it, and then it looked very much as if it is actually the position for the person who lost against the leader. This time, it was part of the constitutional amendments before the time already, and it was one of the most interesting votes. I was there personally, so I could see it. And it looked almost like a 50-50 split amongst the 2,000 delegates there. It wasn't explained exactly what will be the purpose of such a position. I think the one thing which should not be the case is that it is reserved for the person who loses the vote with respect to the top leadership position, because that will create, I would say, a bad precedent. It should be a position in its own right. That was at this stage also not well defined. My prediction is that at the next conference in 3 years' time, it will become really a serious proposal. And then I think there is a good chance that it will be accepted. What I think one has to keep in mind is that the top leadership of the DA consists not of one person, but of three. The other two positions is that of the national chairperson, Ivan Meyer, now, and the chairperson of the Federal Council, who is Helen Zille. They play different roles, so there's almost a power sharing arrangement at the top. And therefore there was not yet clarity of where this deputy leader will fit into that structure that already exists.
Prof, I want to get your thoughts. I just want to circle back to the coalition talk, because the point is, in the end, there isn't a deputy federal leader, and that's the decision the DA has gone with now. That's what their delegates voted on. So we'll have to leave that as is. That's what we're taking into 2024. As a voter going to the polls next year, how difficult is it to try and understand and cast a vote for a political party now when there's so much flip-flopping when it comes to municipal and provincial governance and the coalitions? I think a lot of voters could be getting very anxious next year. You vote for Party A, but the problem is, even if you know who they're in bed with right now, politics, things change very quickly, as you know. So it's going to be very tricky, I think, with a lot of anxiety for voters next year. Even if they were to vote for the DA, no one knows who they might get into bed with. They say not the ANC and not the EFF, but it's politics. Things change.
Yes, you are very much correct with that. And I think that's possibly part of the motivation for John Steenhuisen to make the announcements yesterday to say he wants to have established a coalition before the election already, so that there's more clarity of who are the partners of such a coalition, and what the voters, collectively speaking, will vote for then at the election. This is something completely new. We haven't had that before. Only once in KwaZulu-Natal there was something similar between the DA and the IFP, and it didn't work very well. But I think in this case, they want to first of all solidify the relationships between the possible members of such a coalition, and secondly, make it more public about who are the participants in something, and that it is not a deal negotiated behind the scenes immediately after an election and under pressure also, because there's not sufficient time for that. So I think the dynamics around coalitions will, in the next 8 to 12 months, will change quite significantly.
And I certainly hope a lot of people who are hoping to vote next year keep a close eye on how these coalitions work. It's almost a voter education, see how the dynamics change and ebb and flow. Prof, just a last question to you. I know I'm kicking the tin down the road once again to next year's elections, but this is what I think is going to be the talking point until we get to it next year. John Steenhuisen is now the leader of the Democratic Alliance. If they were to gain more votes next year, and an expectation the ANC will lose votes, could we see John Steenhuisen as the deputy president of the country? Could he get into the union buildings? Is that how this could play out?
Well, this is certainly one of the scenarios that the DA is working with. They don't say it. They say they want to be there in their own right in government, and that they are very close to the ANC already. I think it's a bit of an overstatement of the case. But it is certainly possible that senior persons in the DA will become members of a national coalition, starting with John Steenhuisen. Obviously, we don't know in which position it will be, but certainly this is part of the scenario that is unfolding towards next year.
And we're going to continue with our coverage and analysis and reaction to the DA Congress from the weekend. Appreciate your time so early in the morning, Prof. Political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze joining us this morning.